Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all the ships at sea. I begin tonight with a look to the past, November 4, 1979 to be exact. Does that date ring a bell with any of my viewers? That happens to be the last time the United States had American citizens held hostage prior to the current illegal regime. On that date in 1979, Iranian Muslim militants stormed the U.S. Embassy and captured all staff inside, holding them for 444 long days, until Ronald Reagan took the presidency in January of 1981. Why would I bring up such a distant stain on American history, you ask? Allow me to wander to the current illicit regime of Joseph Biden. For it was during his campaign of terror on the USA, the House of Representatives, led by Democrat mobsters, illegally held a show trial over the opening of the U.S. Capitol building for tourists on January 6, 2021. The eventful day when the U.S. presidency was fraudulently handed to criminal Biden. For it was on that day that Ray Epps and other paid plants for the CIA and FBI did everything within their powers to attempt to ignite a riot on the U.S. Capitol. In fact, the FBI shot the peaceful protesters with rubber bullets in vain efforts to instigate a bloody riot, all captured on videos that have since been released to the public. We have all since seen the released video recordings from the U.S. Capitol CCTV cameras whereby we see the truth that the peaceful protesters were escorted into the building and through by police and security personnel staff on duty at the time. Nothing even close to forced entry or rioting took place on the eventful day, despite every effort of Nancy Pelosi and her band of thugs to paint it as an insurrection planned and plotted by President Donald Trump. And what has been the result? Over 890 innocent Americans currently being held hostage by a tyrannical leftist regime which illicitly stole the presidency and now punishes anyone who disagrees with their right to rule, if you can even call what we have witnessed over the past 3.5 years as rule. The videos have been widely publicized of the supposed rioters being escorted into and through the U.S. Capitol building on that day. This, my viewers, is despicable, filthy, and utterly aberrant that we have allowed this to go on in our once great nation. These are people with families, livelihoods, and lives. These are people who harmlessly strolled through the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021 as guests of the Capitol Hill Police. Don't take this puppet's word for it. Search online for yourself. Is anyone familiar with the name Ray Epps? This is a federal employee of the FBI who instigated, agitated, and otherwise spurned protesters onward into the Capitol building on that day. He remained uncharged for the longest time and then came away with symbolic 1-year probation for his efforts in the whole affair. So these are the only 2 U.S. presidencies in modern history where American citizens actually were taken as hostages. Those under the Carter administration as victims of militant Iranian Muslims, those under the Biden cartel as victims of criminal U.S. government. Juan Enrique Tarrio, leader of a group called the Proud Boys, was not even present at the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021, yet he was sentenced to 22 years in prison. What would otherwise link the presidencies of Carter and Biden, you ask? Oh, try record inflation, record gasoline prices at the pump, and other ineptitudes at actually being capable of properly leading the United States of America. So let us take a moment or two to consider some damning indictments against the current regime as it pertains to the January 6th show trial held in the U.S. House of Representatives. For starters, most in this country in grade school are taught about a little thing otherwise known as the Gettysburg Address. This was only the most famous speech given by Abraham Lincoln, maybe the most revered president in U.S. history, if not one of only a few near the top of that list. For it is during the most famous of presidential speeches that we first heard, quote, "The government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth," unquote. I offer to you this day that those brave January 6 protesters were merely exercising their free and constitutionally guaranteed rights to protest the means of achieving the results of the 2020 general election that were about to be pronounced as law in the U.S. Senate. I will also add that what they were displayed that day, my friends, is of the people and by the people government in its purest form. I will also at this point in time say that those celebrated patriots who engaged in what is presented in grade school history books as the Boston Tea Party would have been indicted by Nancy Pelosi, Adam Schiff, and those other House Democrats who put on the January 6th show trial that led up to the mass hostages taking by our federal government under Felon Joe. Time worked back to 1773 and history will be revised for the worse. It is actually damaging to our republic that these innocent people were tried and taken as hostages. How, you ask? Following the lead of the Democrats here, nobody can rightfully criticize or question the result of an election in the U.S. going forward, or else we've tried and taken as hostages also. This is as chilling as it gets on a free republic like ours. Inability to question election results can only lead to what we have witnessed in Asia, Africa, and South American countries for centuries. Military dictatorships is not what our founding fathers ever envisioned or intended. People punished for simply protesting the mass amount of evidence stacking up against the validity of the November 3rd, 2020 presidential election. You know, not so minor things like poll watchers being kicked out of polling stations in Detroit while cardboard pizza boxes were taped over windows. Nothing to see there, obviously. Trunks of ballots pulled out from under polling center tables late in the night in Atlanta, Georgia, long enough for the poll watchers had been sent home under the false premise of a supposedly busted water pipe flood that never actually took place. Jack Dorsey, Sundar Pichai, and Mark Zuckerberg censoring and even banning accounts for anyone who spoke out against the election rigging. Zuckerberg funding illegal street ballot boxes in major cities that were knowingly stuffed with ballots from dead bodies in cemeteries. Lives, families, and livelihoods and the very future of our nation are at stake here. We have close to 1,000 Americans rotting in federal prisons for simply the crime of protesting a fraudulent election and touring the U.S. Capitol building guided by police and security personnel. A travesty to say the least, and one of the most heinous crimes committed by the Biden cartel to date. This should keep each of us up late at night. I should also mention that in researching for this video, every lamestream media website makes fraudulent claims that the January 6th protesters were the most egregious, violent insurrectionists imaginable. This is rather interesting considering their failure to condemn the BLM and Antifa terrorists of 2020 who burned, looted, killed, and destroyed American citizens. Thousands of arrests were made, but most of those were quickly dismissed. They weren't held. Remember Kyle Rittenhouse, the patriot who was illegally tried for defending the city of Kenosha, Wisconsin from the BLM thugs? A subject for another video entirely. So, my loyal viewers, it is past time for all under the sound of my voice to speak out against this miscarriage of justice. Contact every elected representative you can and let them hear your displeasure with innocent Americans being held as political hostages within the U.S. borders. We cannot remain quiet for another day. We've got a job to do. Now get to it. Good night and sleep well.